In 2023, a team of researchers hiked for weeks into one of the most remote jungles on Earth. They were looking for an animal most scientists believed had been extinct for decades. And they found it. 4 short video clips, each one only a few seconds long, but enough to confirm what seemed impossible, that a species thought to be lost to history was still out there, still alive, still moving through the dark forest like nothing had changed. That's what this video is about. Not just rare animals, but the moments they were caught on camera. The accidental frames, the trail cam flickers, the footage that scientists played back and couldn't believe. Some of these animals exist in numbers you can count on your hands. Some were thought to be gone forever, and a few of them are making a comeback that nobody predicted. These are 20 of the rarest animals ever documented on film. And fair warning, some of these stories are going to hit harder than you expect. If you're into wildlife, conservation, and the kind of stories that don't make the mainstream news, you're exactly who this channel is for. Hit subscribe so you never miss one. Now let's get into the countdown. Number 20. Vaquita. We're starting this countdown with an animal that might not make it to the end of this decade. The vaquita is the smallest cetacean on Earth. A tiny porpoise, barely 4 feet long, with dark rings around its eyes that give it a permanently startled expression. It lives only in the northern Gulf of California, a narrow strip of sea between the Baja Peninsula and the Mexican mainland. And right now, only about 10 of them are believed to be alive. 10 individuals, in the entire ocean. This species was only officially discovered in 1958. In less than 70 years, within a single human lifetime, its population went from unknown to functionally extinct. That is not a slow ancient decline. That is a collapse happening in real time right now, while we watch. The cause is almost insultingly simple: illegal gill nets. These large mesh nets are set in the Gulf to catch totoaba fish, whose swim bladders are trafficked to China for traditional medicine. The vaquita, curious and slow-moving, swims into these nets and drowns. It isn't hunted, it isn't targeted, it's just in the way. The first clear photograph of a wild vaquita wasn't taken until 2003, a blurry glimpse of a head breaking the surface. For most of human history, we didn't even know this animal existed. Now we're watching it disappear. Conservation teams are in the water every season. Mexican naval ships patrol the zone. International organizations have spent millions, and the number keeps falling. 10 vaquitas, 1 storm, 1 net, 1 bad season could end this species forever, and most people have never heard of it. Number 19. Okapi. For years, European explorers heard stories from local communities in Central Africa about a strange forest animal. Something large, something striped, something that moved through the Ituri rainforest like a ghost. The outside world decided it was myth, a local legend. The kind of story that gets told around fires and grows with each retelling. Then, in 1901, science finally caught up. The Okapi was real, and it is one of the most visually improbable animals on the planet. A deep reddish-brown body, velvety and smooth. And then, on its hindquarters and upper legs, sharp black and white horizontal stripes that look like they belong on a completely different animal. The immediate assumption is always zebra, but the Okapi is not related to zebras. It's the closest living relative of the giraffe. Look closely, and you can see it. The long neck, the large mobile ears, the same velvet-textured coat. The Okapi is essentially what a giraffe looks like when it decides to live in a dense forest where a 6-meter neck would be a serious inconvenience. Those stripes aren't decorative. In the filtered green light of the Ituri canopy, they break up the animal's outline, making it extraordinarily difficult to see at short range. Young okapis use the stripes to track their mothers through thick undergrowth, essentially following a visual beacon through the dark forest. Even today, wild okapi sightings are rare events. The forest they inhabit is politically unstable, physically difficult to access, and one of the least studied ecosystems on Earth. What camera trap footage does exist tends to be brief, accidental, and extraordinary. An animal that hid from science for all of recorded history. Still hiding mostly, still real. Number 18. Irrawaddy dolphin. This dolphin should not exist where it does. Most dolphins are ocean animals, built for open water, long distances, deep dives. The Irrawaddy dolphin chose rivers instead. The Mekong, the Irrawaddy, the Mahakam. Freshwater systems threading through some of the most densely populated landscapes on Earth. And that choice, made millions of years ago through evolution, is now killing it. The Mekong River alone supports over 1,000 species. The Irrawaddy dolphin sits near the top of that system as a predator and ecological anchor. When it disappears, It doesn't just leave a gap. It destabilizes the web of relationships beneath it. Fewer than 100 Irrawaddy dolphins remain in the wild. That number is not stable. It is declining. Entire subpopulations have already vanished, gone not through hunting, not through deliberate harm, but through the quiet, unreported violence of fishing nets. The dolphins are not targeted. They are trapped. They follow fish into gillnet zones, become entangled, and drown without ever breaking the surface. These deaths often happen at night. Many are never recorded. They simply don't come back. For generations, communities along the Mekong considered the Irrawaddy dolphin sacred, a protector of fishermen, a bringer of good fortune, an animal you did not harm without consequence. That cultural protection slowed the decline for decades. It wasn't enough to stop it. What makes this story especially difficult is where it's happening. The Mekong is one of the most studied river systems in the world. Scientists know exactly what's killing these dolphins, exactly where they live, exactly what needs to change. And the decline continues anyway. Number 17. Saola. Most new large mammal discoveries happen like this: a skull, some bones, a skin found in a hunter's hut. Fragmented evidence that tells you something exists without telling you what it actually is. That's how science learned about the Saola in 1992. A skull with 2 long straight horns, found in a remote mountain range on the border of Vietnam and Laos. It didn't match anything in the scientific record. It was, formally, a species completely unknown to science. A large forest antelope that had been living in the Annamite Mountains, apparently for thousands of years, without ever being formally documented. They called it the Asian unicorn, which sounds poetic, but the name carries a darker weight than it seems, because like a unicorn, almost nobody has ever seen one. The last confirmed photograph of a wild Saola was taken in 2013, more than a decade ago. Since then, nothing. No camera trap image, no footprint, no fresh evidence of any kind. The Saola may still be out there, or it may already be gone. And the terrifying truth is that we genuinely don't know which. Estimates of the remaining population range from a few hundred to a few dozen. Those aren't population statistics. That's a species balanced on a knife's edge, in forests too remote to patrol effectively, against poaching pressure that never stops. Conservation teams work these forests continuously, removing snare lines, patrolling known corridors, deploying camera traps across thousands of hectares. They have found Saola tracks. They have found hair samples, but no clear footage. Not in over 10 years. If the Saola still exists, it is hiding better than almost any large mammal on Earth. If it doesn't, we may never know the exact moment it left. Quick pause. If this is hitting differently than your usual wildlife content, that's exactly what we're going for. Drop a like if you're feeling it, and let's keep going. Number 16. Red panda. You know the giant panda, black and white, bamboo. China, one of the most recognizable conservation symbols on the planet. What most people don't know is that there's another panda, smaller, older as a species, and arguably even more striking. The red panda has been living in the misty mountain forests of the Himalayas and southwestern China for millions of years, predating the giant panda in the fossil record by a significant margin. In fact, the word panda originally referred to the red panda. The giant panda got the name later, and the red panda needs help just as urgently. The first confirmed footage of a red panda in Myanmar wasn't captured until 2014. Not because the animal was newly arrived, but because the forests it lives in are so steep, so dense, and so difficult to access that camera traps hadn't penetrated them yet. That footage wasn't a discovery, it was a confirmation. The red panda had been there the whole time, but that confirmation came with a troubling context. The reason red pandas were appearing in areas where they hadn't been documented wasn't because populations were expanding. It was because habitat destruction was pushing them out of their traditional ranges and into less protected areas, more visible and more vulnerable. Deforestation, urban expansion, and the illegal wildlife trade have reduced red panda populations significantly. Their fragmented habitat makes genetic exchange between isolated groups increasingly difficult. And their specialized diet, almost entirely bamboo, means any disruption to the forest they live in hits them immediately. The trajectory has improved slowly, thanks to protected reserves and conservation legislation in China, Nepal, and India. The red panda is no longer at the absolute edge, but it remains endangered, and its recovery is fragile enough that a single bad decade of deforestation could reverse everything that's been gained. Number 15. Great Argus. The great Argus pheasant lives in the lowland forests of Borneo and the Malay Peninsula. Experienced birders, people who have spent careers searching tropical forests, report spending years in this bird's territory without ever seeing one. Some have waited decades. And then, briefly, there it is. The male great argus clears a specific patch of forest floor, his personal stage, maintained and returned to season after season. When the moment arrives, he spreads his enormous secondary wing feathers outward to reveal hundreds of perfectly formed eye-shaped patterns, each one a sphere of brown and gold shading so precise it looks three-dimensional. The effect is not beautiful in a simple way. It is overwhelming, like suddenly being surrounded by 1,000 watching eyes. The display lasts minutes, sometimes less, and then the bird folds his wings, steps back into the undergrowth, and vanishes as completely as if he was never there. Recorded footage of this display is genuinely rare, not because it doesn't happen, but because happening to have a camera positioned correctly, in the right forest, at the right moment, is the kind of luck that doesn't come often. When you watch the footage that does exist, you're not just watching a bird perform, you're watching something most humans alive today will never see in person. Number 14. Golden Lion Tamarin. Not every story on this countdown is a warning. Some of them are proof that when humans actually commit to fixing something, the natural world responds. The golden lion tamarin is a small monkey native to the Atlantic coastal forests of Brazil, one of the most biodiverse and most destroyed ecosystems on Earth. By the 1970s, the Atlantic forest had been reduced to roughly 12% of its original cover, and the golden lion tamarin, already restricted to that shrinking habitat, had been pushed to the absolute edge. Population estimates put the number at around 200 individuals. 200 individuals. For an entire species. That is the kind of number that usually precedes an extinction announcement, not a recovery story. But what followed was one of the most intensive and ultimately successful conservation campaigns in wildlife history. Habitat corridors were rebuilt, strips of reforested land connecting isolated forest fragments, so that tamarin populations could move, mix, and maintain genetic health. Captive breeding programs in zoos around the world produced animals that were then reintroduced to the wild. Local communities were brought into the protection effort rather than pushed out of it. By 2023, the population had reached approximately 4,800 individuals, a number that, 50 years ago, would have seemed like fantasy. The golden lion tamarin is still classified as endangered. Its habitat is still fragile. The work isn't finished, but the direction has changed, and that change was not accidental. It was chosen, funded, staffed, and sustained by people who decided this animal was worth saving. It was. Number 13. Whistling dog, Dhole. Forget everything you think you know about wild dogs. The Dhole, also called the Asiatic wild dog, or the whistling dog, doesn't bark. Instead, it communicates through a repertoire of high-pitched whistles, clucks, and screams that echo through the forest in a way that sounds almost nothing like a canid. If you heard it without knowing the source, you'd be scanning the treetops for a bird. Dholes are pack hunters, capable of taking down prey many times their individual size. They've been documented hunting sambar deer, water buffalo calves, and in rare cases, confronting tigers over kills. They are, by any measure, one of Asia's most capable predators, and almost nobody knows they exist. Listed as endangered, with populations declining across their range, dholes have quietly disappeared from large parts of South and Southeast Asia. In some regions, researchers went years without a single documented sighting, until camera traps near Kaziranga National Park in Assam captured images of a pack that hadn't been officially recorded there in nearly a decade. The threats are familiar: habitat loss compressing their range, declining prey populations due to poaching, and direct competition with larger predators like tigers and leopards that are now concentrated in the same shrinking forest patches. The whistling dog persists, but it's doing so increasingly quietly, in forests that are getting smaller every year. Number 12. Pygmy three-toed sloth. The pygmy three-toed sloth has found a strategy that worked for millions of years. Move as little as possible, stay in the trees, and let the world forget you're there. It worked, until the world got smaller. This sloth exists on exactly one place on Earth, Isla Escudo de Veraguas, a tiny island off the Caribbean coast of Panama. Not a region, not a country, one island. The entire global population of this species lives within a few square kilometers of mangrove and forest that you could walk across in an afternoon. When your entire species lives on one island, every threat is existential. There is no backup population. There is no secondary habitat to retreat to. Deforestation on that island doesn't reduce the range, it removes it. Hunting on that island doesn't reduce numbers, it ends them. And both have been happening. Forest clearance, hunting for food, and the largely unregulated exotic pet trade, people actually attempting to capture and sell pygmy sloths as novelties, have pushed a species that was already geographically cornered toward a cliff it can't come back from. The pygmy three-toed sloth moves at approximately 0.15 miles per hour. It cannot flee danger. It cannot disperse to new habitat. It cannot adapt quickly to rapid environmental change. The very qualities that made it a successful species for millions of years have made it almost helpless against the pace of modern human activity. It is critically endangered. Protection of its single island is the only thing standing between this animal and oblivion. Number 11. Birds of Paradise. We covered the birds of paradise in our mating rituals video. The extraordinary displays, the precision choreography, the evolutionary arms race that produced some of the most spectacular plumage on Earth. But there's another side to that story, and it's darker. For centuries, the feathers of birds of paradise were among the most valuable commodities in the global trade in natural materials. They decorated the hats of European aristocracy. They were woven into ceremonial garments. They were shipped by the hundreds of thousands from New Guinea to fashion markets in London and Paris. Some species were hunted to near collapse before legal protections arrived. And today, the threats have shifted, but not disappeared. Deforestation is now the primary driver. The tropical forests of Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and northeastern Australia are under continuous pressure from logging, agricultural expansion, and infrastructure development. As those forests fragment, bird populations become isolated, unable to maintain the genetic diversity and habitat connectivity they need. Climate change is adding another layer of pressure, disrupting the seasonal timing of breeding and food availability in ways that are still being studied. There are more than 40 species of birds of paradise. Most are not currently endangered, but the trajectory for their habitat, and therefore for them, is not reassuring. And the footage that exists of their displays, while breathtaking, is increasingly a record of something that may not always be there to film. Number 10. Fossa. Madagascar has been isolated from the rest of the world for roughly 88 million years. In that time, its wildlife evolved on its own terms, producing animals found nowhere else on Earth. Lemurs, tenrecs, chameleons, and at the top of the food chain, one of the most unusual carnivores alive, the fossa. A cat-sized predator that looks like someone tried to build a puma using the parts of a mongoose. Long body, retractable claws, a long tail for balance, and the fluid, boneless movement of an animal that treats trees as extensions of the ground. The fossa is the apex predator of Madagascar. Its primary prey is lemurs, and in a functioning ecosystem, that relationship matters. Top predators regulate prey populations, which in turn shape vegetation, which shapes everything else. Remove the fossa from Madagascar's forests, and the entire system begins to drift. But the fossa is rarely seen. Solitary, mostly nocturnal, and deeply cautious of humans, it avoids observation with a consistency that has made it genuinely difficult to study. Scientists attempting to estimate population size have had to rely on indirect evidence, tracks, scat, camera trap glimpses, because direct sightings are so rare. That invisibility is a scientific problem. You can't protect what you can't measure, and what limited data exists suggests that habitat loss and fragmentation are reducing fossa populations across the island. As Madagascar's forests shrink, and they are shrinking dramatically, the fossa is being pushed into smaller and smaller territories, increasingly in conflict with farming communities on the forest edge. Camera trapping programs are beginning to change this picture. Every image captured is a data point in a map that's slowly coming into focus. But the map is filling in faster than the forest is being protected. We're entering the top 10 now, and these are the ones that genuinely kept me up researching. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit the button, and let's keep going. Number 9. Yangtze giant softshell turtle. 4. That is the current known global population of the Yangtze giant softshell turtle. Not 400, not 40, 4 individual animals, scattered between a managed reserve in Vietnam and a protected facility in China, representing the entire surviving remnant of a species that once ranged across river systems throughout China and Southeast Asia. The Yangtze giant softshell turtle is the largest freshwater turtle on Earth. It can grow to over 1 meter in length and live for over a century. It is ancient in the deepest sense, a lineage stretching back tens of millions of years. And it is being erased in a single human generation through habitat destruction, hunting, and water pollution, so severe that the rivers it depended on are no longer functional as habitat. Conservation teams have tried everything available to them: controlled breeding attempts, hormonal treatments, carefully managed pairings between the last known animals. The last confirmed female has been through multiple breeding attempts. None have produced viable offspring. If she dies before that changes, leaving only males, the species enters a terminal phase. There is no recovery from 3 males. There is only the slow, certain end of something that survived the dinosaurs and couldn't survive us. 4 turtles. Every researcher who works on this species carries that number like a weight. Number 8. Spotted handfish. Most fish swim. The spotted handfish walks. Using its pectoral fins, which look unmistakably like stubby hands, it strolls along the sandy seafloor of the Derwent estuary in Tasmania with a deliberate, almost unhurried gait. It looks less like a fish navigating its environment and more like a fish that has decided swimming is beneath it. It's one of those animals that makes you reassess what a fish is supposed to be. The spotted handfish is a member of a family that evolved walking fins tens of millions of years ago, long before anything walked on land. Watching it move feels like looking at a very early draft of terrestrial life. The problem is, its world is almost impossibly small. The entire known global population of spotted handfish lives in the Derwent estuary, one specific estuary in one specific part of Tasmania, within a narrow depth range on sandy substrate. That's it. There are no other populations, no backup habitat. The species has no margin for error. Pollution from the city of Hobart flows into the estuary. Coastal development has altered water quality. Invasive northern Pacific sea stars prey heavily on the stalked ascidians that handfish use as anchor points for their eggs. Remove the anchor points, and reproduction fails. Each of these pressures alone would be manageable. Together, they've pushed the spotted handfish to critically endangered status. Conservation programs are now cultivating sea tulips, the native anchoring organisms, and reintroducing them to handfish habitat. It's detailed, expensive, and unglamorous work. It's also the only thing standing between this extraordinary animal and permanent disappearance from the only estuary it has ever called home. Number 7. Angel shark. Say the word shark, and most people picture a torpedo of muscle and teeth cutting through open water. The angel shark is something else entirely. Flat as a ray, wide as it is long. It spends most of its life pressed against the sandy seabed, motionless and almost completely invisible, waiting for prey to swim close enough to ambush. It doesn't chase. It doesn't patrol. It waits with a patience that borders on geological. Once, angel sharks were common across European coastal waters, from Norway to the Canary Islands, from the Mediterranean to the British Isles. Now, some of the last viable populations in Europe are found in the waters around Wales and the Canary Islands, protected by legislation that makes it illegal to target or harm them. They disappeared quietly. Bottom trawling, the practice of dragging weighted nets across the seafloor, devastated populations across their former range over decades of industrial fishing. The angel shark, lying motionless on the seabed exactly where trawl nets travel, had no behavioral defense against it. By the time the decline was documented, the species had already vanished from most of its historical range. The rare footage that exists of angel sharks in their natural habitat is striking precisely because of how still they are. An animal that poses no threat, requires only an undisturbed seabed, and asks only to be left alone. The fact that we nearly lost it anyway says something uncomfortable about how we've managed the ocean floor. Recovery is possible. Wales has demonstrated that. But it requires sustained commitment and a willingness to keep areas of seabed off limits to the kind of fishing that nearly finished the job. Number 6. Kakapo. New Zealand spent tens of millions of years without land predators. Nothing hunted the birds there. Nothing ran through the undergrowth on 4 legs looking for a meal. And so, over geological time, the birds of New Zealand relaxed their defenses. The Kakapo relaxed more than most. It stopped flying. Why fly when nothing is chasing you? It became nocturnal. It grew large, up to 9 pounds, making it the heaviest parrot on Earth. It developed a musty, sweet smell that's been described as honey mixed with violin rosin, and when threatened, it adopted a strategy that worked perfectly against the predators that didn't exist. It froze completely still and relied on its green-brown camouflage. Then humans arrived, bringing rats, stoats, and cats, predators that hunted by smell, at night, exactly when the Kakapo was most active. The freeze response, so effective against visual hunters, was useless. Cats killed them on the ground. Stoats climbed into nest holes. Rats ate eggs. Within a few centuries of human arrival, the kakapo was gone from most of New Zealand. By the late 20th century, the entire global population had been reduced to 51 individuals. What happened next is one of conservation's most dedicated interventions. Every surviving kakapo was caught, named, fitted with a radio transmitter, and transferred to 3 predator-free islands where teams actively monitor each individual. Every breeding season is managed. Every egg is tracked. Every chick is weighed and health checked. The kakapo has gone from 51 individuals to over 200, not because of passive protection, but because of relentless, hands-on, person-by-person care. Each kakapo now has a name, a personality, a file of behavioral notes maintained by researchers who know it individually. This is conservation at its most intimate, not managing a population, but caring for specific animals, one at a time. It's working. Number 5. Long-beaked echidna. In November 2023, a research team from the University of Oxford returned from an expedition to the Cyclops Mountains of Indonesian Papua. They had been hiking for weeks through one of the most remote and difficult terrains in the world. And when they reviewed their camera trap footage, they found something that made the entire team stop. 4 short clips, each one only a few seconds. But in those clips, a small, spiny animal, moving through the undergrowth with its long snout pressed close to the ground. The Attenborough's long-beaked echidna, a species that had not been documented since 1961. 62 years. Most of the scientific community had effectively written it off. The species appeared on lists of animals that were probably extinct. And there it was, moving through the leaf litter in the dark, completely indifferent to the fact that its existence had been considered a matter of historical record rather than present reality. Echidnas belong to a group called monotremes, egg-laying mammals, the most ancient branch of the mammalian family tree still alive. They share this distinction with only platypuses. Their lineage stretches back over 200 million years. In terms of evolutionary continuity, an echidna is one of the oldest things walking the Earth. The Cyclops Mountains, where this individual was found, are among the least explored highland forests in the world. They're steep, densely vegetated, and almost completely inaccessible without weeks of hiking, which means the long-beaked echidna didn't survive by being resilient to human pressure. It survived by being somewhere humans couldn't reach. The question now is whether that remoteness holds. Indonesia's forests are under significant development pressure. The same inaccessibility that protected the echidna is not guaranteed to last. But for one extraordinary moment in November 2023, a species came back from the edge of memory, and that deserves to be celebrated. Number 4. Axolotl. The axolotl can regrow a lost limb in weeks. It can regenerate damaged heart tissue. It can repair portions of its own spinal cord. Scientists studying regenerative medicine have been studying axolotl biology for decades, trying to understand how an animal can rebuild itself at a cellular level in ways that mammals, including humans, simply cannot. This animal isn't just rare, it's irreplaceable as a research subject, and it is disappearing from the only wild place it has ever existed. Axolotls are endemic to a small network of lakes and canals near Mexico City, specifically the Xochimilco wetland system, a remnant of the ancient lake system that once covered the Valley of Mexico. As Mexico City expanded over the 20th century, those lakes were drained, diverted, and built over. The Xochimilco canals are what's left, and they are severely polluted, invaded by non-native fish species that eat axolotl eggs and young, and shrinking in both size and water quality every year. In the late 1990s, researchers could find thousands of axolotls per square kilometer in the canals. By 2015, that density had fallen to fewer than a handful. The axolotl is enormously popular worldwide, as a pet, as a research animal, as an internet-famous face with its permanent smile and feathery gills. But its wild population is critically endangered. In a lake system under a city of 21 million people, captive axolotls number in the millions. The wild ones may number in the hundreds. Those are not the same animal in any meaningful conservation sense. Captive populations don't restore a wild ecosystem, and the biology of a species changes under captive conditions over generations. Restoration efforts in Xochimilco are ongoing. Water filtration projects, invasive species removal, community-based conservation programs that train local farmers as axolotl stewards. Whether those efforts can outpace the pressures bearing down on the last wild habitat is the question that defines this animal's future. Number 3. Sumatran orangutan. An orangutan spends most of its life in the forest canopy. It builds a new sleeping nest every single night, a fresh platform of bent and woven branches high above the ground. It uses tools. It plans. It has been observed teaching skills to younger individuals and modifying behavior based on past experience. The Sumatran orangutan is one of our closest living relatives, and it is critically endangered. Sumatra has lost more than half of its forest cover in the past 50 years. Palm oil plantations, paper and pulp operations, and small-scale agriculture have converted ancient rainforest into monoculture at a pace that is difficult to fully comprehend unless you look at satellite images from decade to decade. What was continuous forest becomes fragmented patches. What were fragmented patches become isolated islands of trees surrounded by cleared land. An orangutan in a forest fragment cannot easily move to another fragment. It can't cross open farmland safely. It can't find mates outside its immediate group. As fragments shrink and become genetically isolated, population viability degrades. The Sumatran orangutan isn't just losing habitat, it's losing the connectivity that makes survival across a landscape possible. Fewer than 14,000 Sumatran orangutans are estimated to remain in the wild. Their population is declining. The rate of deforestation in Sumatra has slowed slightly in recent years under international pressure and domestic conservation policy. But slowing a decline is not ending it. What gives this entry a thread of hope is the footage that does exist. Orangutans still moving through intact forest, mothers with infants navigating the canopy, individuals using tools in ways that suggest a behavioral richness we are only beginning to understand. They haven't given up. They're still there, still adapting, still raising young in forests that are shrinking around them. The question is whether we'll stop the shrinking in time. Number 2. Giant seahorse of Indonesia. In seahorse reproduction, the female deposits eggs into a pouch on the male's abdomen. He fertilizes them internally, carries them through the gestation period, and gives birth, often to hundreds of live young, in a process that looks, to human eyes, almost indistinguishable from labor. It is one of the few examples in the animal kingdom of male pregnancy. And in the giant seahorse of Indonesia, it's happening in one of the most threatened marine environments on Earth. The giant seahorse grows larger than most of its relatives, a striking, deliberate moving animal that anchors itself to coral and seagrass beds around a small number of Indonesian islands. Its size makes it visible in a way that smaller seahorses aren't, which has made it a target for the aquarium trade and for traditional medicine markets that use dried seahorses, regardless of species or conservation status. But the deeper threat is structural. Seahorses are ecological indicators, species whose presence or absence reflects the overall health of the reef system they inhabit. When giant seahorse populations decline, it usually means the coral is stressed, the seagrass beds are degrading, and the water quality is deteriorating. The seahorse isn't just a species in trouble, it's a signal that the entire system around it is in trouble. Indonesia's coral reefs are among the most biodiverse in the world and among the most pressured. Blast fishing, runoff from coastal development, rising ocean temperatures causing bleaching events, and microplastic contamination are all active threats. The giant seahorse navigates all of them, while also contending with collection for trade. Captive breeding programs have had some success. Marine protected areas around key reef sites are providing partial relief. But each seahorse born in the wild is a small affirmation that the reef it depends on is still functional. Every birth matters, not just for the seahorse, but for everything sharing its water. And our number 1, the animal that became the face of conservation itself, and whose recovery, against all odds, actually worked. Number 1. Giant panda. In 2016, the giant panda was downlisted on the IUCN Red List from endangered to vulnerable. For a species that had spent decades as the symbol of everything conservation was failing to achieve, that single sentence represented something close to extraordinary. The giant panda never made it easy to save it. Female pandas are fertile for roughly 72 hours per year. Cubs are born extraordinarily small, about 1/900th the size of the mother. about the size of a stick of butter. They're blind, pink, and helpless for months. Twins are common, but pandas in the wild typically raise only one, allowing the other to die. Even under optimal conditions, giant panda reproduction is slow, fragile, and unforgiving of error. And yet, 50 years of sustained investment in habitat protection in the Qinling and Minshan mountain ranges of Sichuan, Shanxi, and Gansu provinces, breeding programs that studied panda biology until researchers understood the reproductive cycle well enough to intervene effectively, community programs that gave people living near panda habitat economic alternatives to logging, international funding and political will, sustained across multiple governments and decades. It worked. Not completely. The panda is still vulnerable, and its bamboo forest habitat is still under pressure. But the trajectory changed. The giant panda became famous as a conservation symbol partly because of how it looks. The black and white markings, the round face, the apparent gentleness. That fame generated funding and attention that other, less charismatic species could never access. In a sense, the panda used its celebrity to survive. But the more important lesson isn't about pandas specifically. It's about what the recovery demonstrated, that when resources are committed, when habitat is genuinely protected, when the science is done properly and the work is sustained over decades, species can come back. The curve can change direction. That is the most important thing the panda's story tells us. These 20 animals were caught on camera. That means they're still here. That means there's still time. Before you go, which of these animals hit you hardest? Was it the Vaquita, with 10 individuals left? The echidna coming back after 62 years? The turtle balanced on 4? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers genuinely shape what we cover next. If this video gave you something worth keeping, hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel find more people who care about this stuff as much as we do. Subscribe if you haven't. New video every day, always going deeper than the headlines. The next one is already on your screen. See you there.